Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. I'm Rylan. In the past decade or so, dragons have reigned supreme over our TV screens, thanks to one George R.R. Martin. When Game of Thrones debuted in 2011, it changed the landscape of fantasy and TV production as we know it, and continues to do so with its successor series, House of the Dragon. No matter how many criticisms you might harbor for both projects, and trust us, there are valid critiques of both shows, the one thing the fandom is united in wanting more of is dragons. House of the Dragon addressed the severe personality issue that Game of Thrones dragons had by introducing 9 individual and distinct dragons in its first season, but it now looks likely that we will get to see the biggest dragon to have ever existed. Rumors about a prequel show based on Aegon the Conqueror, quite possibly the most important Aegon in A Song of Ice and Fire, have been rife for a few weeks now, and with House of Dragon doing as well as it has, we thought it might be worth looking into what just might be a prequel to a prequel. So here's everything we know about Aegon the Conqueror prequel show. Who is Aegon the Conqueror? If you're not familiar with Game of Thrones, or have been living under a rock so far, Aegon is literally the most important Targaryen in the entire Song of Ice and Fire franchise. He was the first Targaryen Lord of Dragonstone and Valyrian to turn his eye westward and tried to conquer all of Westeros, which he actually succeeded in doing. Aegon established the 7 kingdoms as we know them and created a Targaryen dynasty which ruled over Westeros for nearly 300 years. He was also the rider of Balerion the Black Dread, the largest dragon recorded in Westeros history. Aegon was the man who commissioned the painted table that we love from both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and the one who created the barbaric symbol of power that is the Iron Throne. He was an enigma and almost otherworldly, if the accounts of the Maesters are to be believed. He melted the greatest castle ever built in Westeros in a single night and turned the Drone Sands to glass for daring to kill his sister wife Rhaenys in battle. No, not that one. Aegon is the reason that we know everything we do about the Targaryens, and he ruled for nearly 40 years, keeping 6 separate kingdoms from rebelling at all times with his wits, wisdom, and of course, dragons. A show depicting his life and times would give us unprecedented insight into one of the greatest historical characters from an in-universe perspective, and the reason that this is even being pitched in the first place is because House of the Dragon gave him the importance that his character deserves. How did House of the Dragon's success influence this show's creation? One of the things that House of the Dragon had outclassed its predecessor on is multiple instances of its faithful understanding of the source material. Where Game of Thrones started feeling more and more gratuitous with its violence and overt sexuality season 4 onwards, House of the Dragon has managed to tie everything back to the story and give things narrative importance. Nowhere has this been displayed better than the prophecy of Ice and Fire, which was revealed towards the end of the very first episode. Turns out, the reason behind Aegon conquering Westeros was him having a vision of the new long night, and the fact that Azor Ahai, the prophetic savior, would be born of this line. It is not something added to the show just for the sake of spicing things up. Ryan Condal is a George R.R. Martin superfan, and he is one of the very big reasons why House of the Dragon doesn't feel like a cheap ripoff of Fire and Blood. Ryan has worked with Martin extensively on the development of the show, and the fact that Aegon foresaw the events of the main series is something that George told him during these discussions. We take that to mean that Aegon's prophecy is at least semi-canon to the main series, which is good enough for us. Game of Thrones failed to capture the exact scope of what the Conqueror had achieved by unifying the realm under his rule, and even Harrenhal was a CGI disaster compared to how it had been described in the books. House of the Dragon had already improved upon it significantly with the rendition of Black Heron's Folly, and this gives us hope that one day we'll get to see it in all its glory. Despite being dead for nearly a century at the time of the dance, Aegon feels more relevant than ever before, and if the iron was ever going to get hot enough for HBO to strike on it and produce buckets of cash, it's right now. Fan interest in the Game of Thrones franchise has been single-handedly revived thanks to the success of House of the Dragon, and if HBO allows its creators to actually stick to the source material for the most part going forward, seeing an Aegon the Conqueror show would be at the top of our priority list. But the real question is, does all this mean that the show is actually happening? Is the show really happening? Well, to quote one of George R.R. Martin's most infamous not-a-blog posts, yes and no, and yes and no. The news that this show is being pitched to HBO executives was broken by Variety. The conglomerate themselves have declined commenting on the situation, instead announcing that House of the Dragon Season 2 was under production last week, but this is common when it comes to shows being pitched for development. A prequel series about Aegon the Conqueror has been rumored for years now, if you've been active on certain message boards, but but this update seems to be a soft vindication for them. As for now, all we really know is that the show has been pitched. George R.R. Martin will be executive producer on it, as he is on all adaptations of his work, and it's quite possible that this series might include a feature element to it. Getting a Game of Thrones movie is something we've actually personally wanted for some time now, and Aegon the Conqueror's tale actually gives HBO the perfect chance to pull it off, because if they do both a show and a movie, then they can actually interweave the stories and go crazy on the action budget with the film like they tend to do. So far, there are no writers attached to the script, and it's possible that the show might get the long night treatment and be dropped even after filming the pilot and everything. But just in case it does end up being fast-tracked into development, as fans hope to be the case, it will be very interesting to say the least to see who HBO casts as Aegon himself. The fandom tends to want it to be Henry Cavill, but who do you think it should be? Let us know in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, guys.